Some hospitals are more than just buildings. They're archives of pain. Welcome to St. Jude's, a place where the silence of the morgue is heavier than any shroud. My name is Nathan Cole, a trauma analyst called in for a staffing crisis. But I found myself living by 3 strange rules, just to survive the secrets buried beneath this hospital. What's the creepiest place you've ever worked? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to descend into the pathology wing with me, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because down here, the dead don't rest. They wait. Wait. The examination begins. I spent the better part of my adult life staring into the abyss of human trauma, cataloging the myriad ways minds can fracture under pressure. Cults, disaster zones, high-stress corporate meltdowns. I'd seen the fallout, but nothing. No textbook, no field study, had quite prepared me for the particular kind of cold that permeated St. Jude's Hospital after the sun bled out of the Boston sky. I'd called me in under the vague, sterile umbrella of a staffing crisis. Psychological breakdowns, I had said. Nurses walking off shifts mid-scream. Orderlies experiencing vivid hallucinations. And disappearances. Several unexplained, unsettling vanishings. All radiating outwards from the hospital's perpetually chilled subterranean morgue. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, head of psychiatry, a woman whose composure was as starched as her lab coat, had been the one to make the call. Her voice over the encrypted line had been carefully neutral, but I detected the tremor beneath. This wasn't just professional concern. My first rule of thumb in these situations: everyone has a personal stake. The first official rule they gave me, however, came from a young, terrified-looking orderly named Marcus, his eyes darting down the flickering fluorescent hallway as if the shadows themselves had teeth. "The morgue doors, Dr. Cole," Ed whispered, his breath fogging in the unnaturally cool air of the corridor leading to the pathology wing. Rule 1. Always double lock. Heavy steel. Tungsten bolts, even if you're just stepping out for a second to. He'd waved a hand, unable to quite voice the need for a reprieve from the oppressive atmosphere within. Old man Hemlock, the night porter before he didn't show up for his shift last month. He used to say that second rule: if a drawer, one of the refrigerated ones, slides open on its own, don't you dare peek, doctor. Don't you ever look inside. Just shove it back, hard, and say a prayer if you're inclined. The place itself felt ancient, a warren of echoing linoleum, buzzing ballasts, and that persistent low hum from the industrial-grade ventilation system that, if you listened too closely in the dead of night, sounded disquietingly like a drawn-out Zora full of exhalation, formaldehyde, antiseptic, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old pennies and forgotten lilies, clung to the air. My younger brother, Liam, he died in a hospital not unlike this one. A different city, a different set of sterile smiles and hushed apologies. But the scent, that undercurrent of institutionalized decay, was sickeningly familiar. It sharpened the edges of my grief, made my skepticism a more brittle shield than usual. Dr. Marsh met me at the entrance to the pathology wing. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Dr. Cole. Your reputation for discretion and your unique background in both trauma analysis and forensic profiling made you our first choice." Her niece, Sarah, a bright young nurse barely out of training, had been the latest to vanish. Vanished from the morgue, mid-shift, 3 weeks ago. No note, no witnesses, just an empty locker and a duty roster with her name still on it. Evelyn handed me a slim datapad. Initial staff interviews, incident reports. You'll find them inconsistent, conflicting timelines, mentions of strange voices, the feeling of being watched, specifically near the older cold storage units. I spent that first night in the morgue's small, adjoining office, the silence broken only by the rhythmic hum of the refrigeration units. and the occasional distant, mournful clang of the ancient service elevator down the hall. The files were a mess of fear and confusion. Nurses reporting disembodied whispers calling their names. Orderlies seeing fleeting shadows. A pervasive sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I was reviewing a particularly harrowing account from a janitor who'd sworn he'd seen all the drawer handles slowly turning in unison when I heard it. Distinct, unmistakable. A soft, metallic scrape thump from the cold storage room itself. I glanced at my watch. 3:17 a.m. The witching hour, as they say. Rule number 2. About drawers opening on their own, echoed in the sudden frigid silence of my own thoughts. Against my better judgment, my ingrained skepticism already taking a beating, I rose and headed for the heavy, double-locked steel door. The twin tungsten bolts on the morgue door slid back with a well-oiled, menacing click. The air that greeted me from within the cold storage room was a physical shock. Colder than it should have been, carrying that faint, sweet, metallic tang. Stronger now. Row upon row of stainless steel drawers gleamed under the stark, humming fluorescent lights, a silent, orderly city of the dead. My breath plumed before me. I scanned the lines of handles, my heart thudding a little too loudly in the oppressive quiet. There. Unit 12. Block C. The long, horizontal handle was slightly askew. The drawer itself protruding by no more than an inch, a dark sliver of shadow in the otherwise seamless wall of steel. My training, my entire professional ethos, urged me to investigate, to document, to analyze. But Marcus' pale, terrified face, Hemlock's whispered rule. It was a potent counter-argument. I hesitated, the silence stretching. Then, rational thought, or what passed for it in this place at this hour, asserted itself. An old mechanism, a shift in temperature, a settling of the building. Perfectly logical explanations. I reached out, my fingers brushing the frigid steel, and pushed. The drawer slid back into place with a solid, definitive thunk. But not before a blast of intensely cold air, colder than the ambient temperature, washed over my hand, and in that sliver of shadow, in the split second before it closed, I saw, or convinced myself I saw, a flash of something small, something pale and waxy, like a child's discarded doll. My stomach lurched. I backed away, pulling the heavy door shut, the double bolts thudding home with a sound that felt more like sealing a tomb than securing a room. The next few days were spent interviewing the staff who hadn't yet quit, vanished, or been committed. Their stories, when they could be coaxed out, were a tapestry of low-grade terror. Whispers, always the whispers in empty rooms, in crowded corridors, sometimes seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. Voices mimicking deceased patients, or even their own loved ones calling their names with an eerie, sorrowful urgency. Objects, scalpels, charts, a coffee mug, found moved, sometimes thrown, and always. The focal point was the morgue, specifically the older section, Block C, near the ancient, rarely used service elevator that, according to hospital legend, descended into St. Jude's forgotten sub-basements. Dr. Marsh, true to her word, introduced me to Tessa Lynn from the IT department. Tessa was young, sharp, with a nervous energy that seemed at odds with the hospital's somber atmosphere. Her task was to salvage anything usable from the morgue surveillance system. The recordings from the nights of the disappearances are problematic, Dr. Cole, she explained, her fingers flying across a holographic interface, bringing up corrupted files. Massive data degradation, strange energy spikes that seem to coincide with the reported phenomena. It's like something was actively interfering. Meanwhile, Coroner Louis Barrett, a man who seemed to carry the weight of every soul that had passed through his domain, etched onto his face, remained a reluctant gatekeeper. He clutched his rosary beads, muttering about thin places and unsettled accounts. But after I presented him with the official request from Dr. Marsh, and perhaps after sensing the depth of my brother Liam's ghost in my own weary eyes, he finally relented. He led me to a dusty archive room, adjacent to the pathology lab, and gestured towards rows of heavy leather-bound ledgers. The old logs, Doctor. Before everything went digital. Before things got louder down there. Hours later, surrounded by the dry, papery scent of decaying records, I found it. Entries for individuals listed in the newer digital system as transferred to City Central Morgue or released to family, Funeral Home X. But here, in these meticulously handwritten logs from a decade or more ago, their entries ended abruptly. Checked in. Cause of death often listed as pending investigation or, chillingly, sometimes left blank. No corresponding checkout. No signature of release. Their names, I cross-referenced with a grim certainty, matched several of the recently missing staff members. People who, according to hospital records, had simply stopped showing up for work. Tessa called me then, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. Dr. Cole, I've got something. Audio. Heavily distorted, but listen to this. She played the file. Static. The hum of the refrigeration units. Then a woman's voice, panicked, close to the microphone. Nurse Sarah, Evelyn's niece. So cold. Dr. Vexley? Is that you? I thought you were... A choked gasp. The distinct, unmistakable sound of a heavy steel drawer sliding open, then slamming shut. Then only static. Eleanor Vexley, the brilliant, disgraced neurosurgeon. Supposedly dead in a lab fire 20 years ago. My investigation had just taken a very sharp, very cold turn. Eleanor Vexley. The name echoed in the sterile corridors of my mind. A phantom from St. Jude's darker chapters. Evelyn Marsh, her composure cracking ever so slightly when I mentioned the name from Sarah's last recording. Filled in the grim details, Vexley had been a pioneer in neural pathway research, a genius on the brink of revolutionary discoveries in memory and consciousness. But her methods became unorthodox. Rumors of unsanctioned experiments, of a dangerous obsession with cryogenic suspension, and the theoretical possibility of re-imprinting consciousness. Then, the fire. Our lab, located in what was then the newly constructed Research Wing D, was gutted. Vexley, along with all her research notes, was presumed incinerated. An accident, the official report had concluded, caused by faulty experimental equipment. She had a daughter, Evelyn added, her voice barely a whisper. Lila. Died young here at St. Jude's. A rare viral infection, they said. Quarantined. Eleanor never quite recovered. Some said the fire wasn't entirely accidental on her part. On a way out, the occurrences in the morgue. And now, my own experiences escalated. My brother Liam's voice, once a distant echo of grief, now seemed to call to me directly from the cold storage units. His pleas for help so vivid, so real. I'd find myself yanking open my office door, expecting to see him standing there, only to be met by the empty, humming silence. The cold spots were no longer fleeting. They lingered, pockets of unnatural frost forming on the stainless steel, even on the linoleum floor. I'd catch movements at the edge of my vision, shadows detaching themselves from other shadows, only to melt away when I turned. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Each closing of my eyes an invitation for the morgue's insidious whispers to seep into my dreams. Tessa, meanwhile, was making her own unnerving progress. She managed to restore a few seconds of heavily corrupted video footage from the night Dr. Alistair Finch. No relation to the Chandler Institute case, just an unfortunate coincidence of names for this new nightmare. A senior pathologist had disappeared 2 months prior. The grainy, flickering images showed Finch in the main autopsy suite, his back to the camera. He was speaking, gesturing emphatically, clearly arguing with Nothing. Empty air. Then, with a sudden, chilling calmness, he turned, walked directly to one of the refrigerated drawers in Block B, opened it, and lay down inside as if it were a strangely shaped cot. He pulled the drawer shut from the inside. The footage cut to black, the timestamp freezing. Coroner Barrett, his face grayer than usual, his rosary beads clicking like frantic beetles, sought me out. He didn't speak, merely pressed a tightly rolled yellowed blueprint into my hand. He didn't speak, merely pressed a tightly rolled yellowed blueprint into my hand. Found it, he muttered, his eyes darting towards the service elevator. Basement plans. From when they built this wing. Before the alterations. He tapped a trembling finger on a section of the blueprint directly beneath the current morgue. Research Wing Day. It was labeled, condemned, structural instability and asbestos contamination. Access sealed. Beneath it, another, fainter line. Old service tunnel. Connects to boiler room sub-access. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a fear that transcended his usual professional gloom. That elevator, Doctor, it still goes down. I hear it sometimes, late at night, groaning, like it's carrying something heavy. Later that evening, exhausted and on edge, I was staring at my own reflection in the polished steel surface of an instrument tray in a small morgue office. Cleaning up, preparing to call it a night I knew would offer little rest. For a split second, a heartbeat, my reflection wavered, and standing just behind my shoulder, reflected in the steel, was the translucent image of a young girl, pale, with wide, dark, sorrowful eyes, her Victorian-era nightgown strangely luminous. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone. My own tired, haggard face stared back at me. The air in the office dropped 10 degrees. The whisperer, Lila Vexley. She wasn't just a file, a piece of hospital history. She was here, and she'd seen me. The blueprint was a map to a forgotten underworld, a place St. Jude's had tried to bury along with its secrets. Research Wing D Asbestos, I'd claimed, a convenient excuse. Vexley's lab, Lila's presumed origin point. If the whispers and the spectral child were indeed her. Evelyn, when I showed her the plans and shared my theory about Vexley potentially being alive, operating in that sealed-off section, was initially skeptical, then horrified, then grimly determined. Her niece was still missing, if there was even a fraction of a chance. The operation required stealth and a degree of rule bending that made my usual investigative protocols look like child's play. Tessa, from the main IT hub, would attempt to loop short sections of a quiet night surveillance footage from the pathology wing, creating a digital ghost of inactivity. Evelyn would manufacture a minor but attention-grabbing code blue on a distant floor, drawing away the skeleton night security staff. That left me with Barrett. To my surprise, the coroner, his fear now seemingly eclipsed by a morbid, fatalistic curiosity, or perhaps a desperate need for some kind of spiritual closure, didn't need much persuasion. He simply nodded, his hand tightening on his rosary, and produced a tarnished, heavy brass key. Old service elevator master, he'd rasped. Fits the original manual override. God be with you, Dr. Cole. Some doors, they guard more than just empty rooms. The descent in that ancient, groaning cage was like a journey into the bowels of some forgotten beast. Dust motes, thick as funeral shrouds, danced in the weak beam of my flashlight. The air grew progressively colder, stoner, thick with the scent of decay, old chemicals, and something else, a faint, sharp, metallic tang that reminded me unpleasantly of ozone and something akin to freezer burn. When the elevator shuddered to a halt with a resounding clang, The doors creaked open onto a scene from a nightmare. Research Wing D was a mausoleum of abandoned ambition. Dust-covered, archaic medical equipment loomed like skeletal sentinels, strange, bulky cryogenic tanks, their glass cloudy with age, lined one wall. Glass carts and beakers lay shattered on corroded lab benches, and everywhere, a chilling, oppressive silence, broken only by the drip of unseen water and the scuttling of unseen things in the shadows. But there were signs of recent activity. Faint footprints in the thick dust, discarded modern surgical gloves near a surprisingly intact examination table, the incongruous gleam of a new stainless steel instrument tray amidst the rust and decay. Following a narrow corridor, I found it, hidden behind a false wall. Disguised as a bank of malfunctioning electrical panels was a heavy insulated door with a modern keypad lock. A lock Tessa, bless her nimble digital fingers, managed to bypass remotely after I transmitted its schematics. Beyond it lay Eleanor Vexley's secret sanctum, a compact, shockingly modern, and utterly illegal cryogenic laboratory, gleaming chrome, humming machinery, and rows of sleek, frosted glass cryotubes. Not all of them were empty. Unsettlingly human shapes were visible within several, encased in a shimmering blue-white frost. On a workbench, amidst complex monitoring equipment, lay Vexley's journals, meticulously detailed, chillingly detached notes on her experiments, her obsession with Lila, her theories on neurocognitive suspension and consciousness retrieval, and then the lists, names, Sarah's name, Evelyn's niece, Dr. Finch's name, other missing staff. Beside each, a neurological profile, observations on their suitability as preservation subjects, or more horrifyingly, template vessels. She wasn't just preserving them, she was experimenting on them. And then I found the file labeled Lila Protocol, Stage 1, Archival, notes on Eleanor's first, desperate, unsanctioned attempt to cryogenically preserve her daughter all those years ago. Immediately after Lila's death, the procedure had been crude, rushed, performed with improvised equipment in this very sealed wing. The notes spoke of significant cellular degradation and neurological fracturing. She hadn't preserved Lila, she'd shattered her. My blood ran cold. I had to get this evidence out. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam swept across a bank of older, seemingly disused experimental cryo drawers, built into the far wall. Relics from Vexley's original lab. Relics from Vexley's original lab. Something small, white, dangled from the handle of the third drawer from the left, swaying almost imperceptibly in a draft I couldn't feel. I moved closer, my heart hammering. A standard St. Jude's Hospital toe tag, printed on it, in neat, black, clinical lettering. Cole Nathan. Beneath it, date of admission. Today's date. And in the field for time of expiry, the space was chillingly, expectantly, blank. The service elevator, somewhere far above me in the main hospital, whirred suddenly to life, its ancient machinery groaning as it began its slow, inevitable descent. Someone else was coming down, or something, and it knew I was here. The groan of the descending service elevator was a discordant symphony played on rusted cables and decaying hope. Each metallic shriek a countdown in the frigid silence of Eleanor Vexley's subterranean domain. There was no escape. The lab was a sterile, chrome and frost trap, and the toe tag, bearing my name, swaying with an almost sentient malice, was a constant, chilling reminder of my scheduled check-in. My hand slick with nervous sweat, tightened around the heavy maglite. It felt like a child's toy against the enormity of what was unfolding. The ancient cage shuddered to a halt, the clang echoing like a coffin lid slamming shut. The metal grate door, a relic from a more optimistic era of St. Jude's, screeched open, a sound that scraped raw against my nerves. And there she was, Eleanor Vexley. Decades had passed since her meticulously staged demise. Yet time had only sharpened the angles of her face, bleached the warmth from her piercing blue eyes, leaving behind an unnerving, diamond-hard brilliance. She wore a pristine white lab coat, a stark contrast to the grime and decay of the forgotten wing, and in her hand she held a sophisticated pneumatic injector, its slender needle glinting with cold, clinical promise. There was no surprise in her expression, only a chilling, predatory focus, and beneath it, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction. "Dr. Cole," she said, her voice a dry, precise whisper that barely disturbed the frozen air. It was a voice accustomed to command, to dissecting complex problems with ruthless efficiency. "Your punctuality is commendable. I trust my little." Welcome note was sufficiently informative. Preparation, after all, is key to any successful procedure. "Vexley," I managed my own voice, a reedy imitation of composure. The sheer audacity of her, the calm, almost academic tone, was disorienting. This abomination. It's over. I've seen your notes. The missing staff. Sarah Chen, your imperfect vessels. A faint, almost imperceptible smile, as thin and cold as a scalpel's edge, touched her lips. "Over, Doctor. On the contrary, my work is reaching its most crucial phase. I am not, as your rather pedestrian assessment suggests, merely doing things down here. I am rectifying a cosmic error. I am offering humanity the gift of continuity, a release from the brutal, messy finality of death." She gestured with the injector towards the frosted cryotubes lining the far wall, their contents vague, unsettlingly human silhouettes encased in shimmering, blue-white ice. These early trials, they were necessary learning curves. Imperfections in the methodology. But Lila deserves perfection. And you, Dr. Cole, you will help me provide it. Before I could retort, before I could even process the full horror of her words, the already frigid air in the lab plunged. This wasn't the sterile mechanical cold of the refrigeration units. This was an invasive, marrow-deep chill, the kind that whispered of crypts and ancient forgotten sorrows. The overhead fluorescent lights, already struggling, flickered violently, casting a strobe of disorienting, dancing shadows. And the whispers, which had been a faint, unsettling undercurrent, erupted. They swirled around me, a cacophony of voices, childish sobs, frustrated pleas, incoherent fragments of old lullabies, and sharp, accusatory hisses that seemed to probe the deepest, most vulnerable corners of my mind. Lila, her fractured consciousness was a palpable storm in the room. "My daughter," Vexley said, her voice rising slightly, a hint of something akin to maternal pride, or perhaps possessive obsession, lacing her tone. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on me, cold and appraising. "She senses your compatibility, your unique neurological signature. She is discerning. The others, their minds were too brittle, their emotional landscapes too barren. They fractured under the strain of transition." She took a deliberate step towards me. "But you, Dr. Cole, your recent bereavement, your professional immersion in the architecture of human suffering, it has rendered your synaptic pathways remarkably pliable, receptive." My earpiece, the fragile link to Tessa and the world above, crackled with static. Then Tessa's strained voice cut through. "Dr. Cole, are you reading me? The energy signatures down there are off the charts. It's like a localized imp, but organic. I'm losing telemetry. Evelyn's trying to cut power to the sub-level junction, but the old schematics are static. It's rerouted through Her voice dissolved into a burst of white noise. I was truly alone. "You're deluded, Vexley," I choked out, backing away slowly, my eyes scanning for any leverage, any weakness in this sterile chrome cage. Lila isn't a program to be uploaded. She's a child spirit, tormented and shattered by what you did to her. For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion, raw and painful, broke through Vexley's icy composure. Her face contorted. "I tried to save her," she hissed, her voice suddenly raw, venomous. This hospital, with its archaic protocols, its cowardly physicians, they would have let her dissolve into nothingness. I offered her a chance at eternity. I offered her continuation. And this is what you call continuation? I gestured wildly at the oppressive, freezing lab, the howling, disembodied whispers that clawed at my sanity. This endless frozen torment? Vexley advanced, the injector held steady. "She merely needs a stable matrix, Dr. Cole. A resilient consciousness to anchor her own. Your mind, already acquainted with the contours of grief, yet not entirely consumed by it. You are the perfect vessel. You are the perfect vessel. You will lend her your strength, and she, in turn, will grant you an understanding of existence beyond the crude limitations of flesh and blood." The spectral cold intensified, biting at my exposed skin. I could see my breath, thick and white, plumbing in the air. The whispers were no longer just around me. They were inside my head, a disorienting chorus of Lila's fragmented thoughts and emotions, interwoven with my own deepest fears. Liam's face, pale and accusing, swam before my eyes, his voice or her mimicry of it, begging for help from some cold, unreachable place. The crushing weight of my past failures, the faces of patients I couldn't save, the gnawing certainty of my own brother's needless death. Lila was a psychic crowbar, expertly wielded by Vexley, prying open every unhealed wound. Behind Vexley, one of the cryotubes, the one I suspected held Sarah Chen, Evelyn's niece, began to emit a soft, pulsating blue light, a low, guttural moan, a sound that was both human and profoundly not, vibrated through the floor. The frost on the inside of the tube seemed to shift, to writhe. "Don't fight it, Doctor," Vexley urged, her voice softening, taking on a disturbingly persuasive, almost maternal cadence. "Lila understands your pain. She can absorb it, integrate it. There will be no more grief, no more loss, only clarity. And her, with you." My mind raced. I had to break this cycle, not just for myself, but for Lila, for Sarah, for all the other victims of Vexley's monstrous obsession. My eyes fell upon Vexley's workbench, piled high with her meticulous, insane journals. The Lila Protocol. Stage 1. The details of that first, desperate, catastrophic attempt at cryopreservation. The experimental cryo-agent XC7. Highly unstable, without precise thermal counter-regulation. Regulator Unit Alpha. Original cryochamber. Suffered critical overload during initial procedure. Catastrophic cellular fracturing. Regulator Unit Alpha. Lila's first makeshift tomb. It had to be one of the older, disused cryo drawers I'd seen earlier. The ones from Vexley's original, fire-ravaged lab. Perhaps still wired into some archaic, independent power source. If that unit, the source of Lila's initial trauma and her spiritual anchor point, could be disrupted, overloaded again. "You won't have me, Vexley," I spat, forcing myself to move, to act. "And you won't have her. Not like this." I lunged. Not for Vexley, but for the main power conduit supplying her modern cryobank. The one where Sarah Chen was entombed. If I could create a surge, a catastrophic overload, maybe I could disrupt everything. Create enough chaos to find Regulator Unit Alpha. Vexley shrieked, a sound of pure fury, and moved to intercept me. The injector aimed like a weapon. The whispers in my head rose to a deafening crescendo. Images of frozen desolation and endless sorrowful nights flooding my vision. From the glowing cryotube, a frosted hand, impossibly thin, its fingers elongated and tipped with ice-like talons, slammed against the curved glass. From the inside, cracking it with a sound like a gunshot. The doctor was in, and her daughter was throwing a tantrum. The final frigid act of St. Jude's horror show had begun. My lunge for the power conduit was desperate, ill-conceived, but it bought me a precious second. Vexley, momentarily surprised by my direct assault on her precious machinery rather than herself, hesitated. In that instant, the frosted glass of Sarah Chen's cryotube didn't just crack. It exploded outwards in a shower of razor-sharp, ice-cold shards and a billow of supercooled gas. The figure within, wreathed in freezing mist, began to stir, not with life, but with a horrifying, jerky animation, its limbs moving at unnatural angles, a low, guttural growl tearing from its frozen throat. Vexley's experimentaire, imperfect vessel, was DOA, but far from inactive. No, Vexley screamed, diverted, her attention momentarily torn between me and the monstrous result of her hubris. This was my chance. Dodging a clumsy frostbitten swipe from the reanimating thing that had been Sarah, I scrambled towards the bank of older, disused cryo drawers I'd seen earlier. The ones from Vexley's original, fire-ravaged lab. Regulator Unit Alpha. Regulator Unit Alpha. Lila's first makeshift tomb. It had to be here. The whispers in my head. Lila's fragmented consciousness shrieked and recoiled as I neared them. A maelstrom of childish terror and ancient rage. The cold intensified around this specific bank of drawers. A palpable aura of concentrated despair. Lila. Stop him, Vexley commanded, wrestling with the thrashing, ice-encrusted form of her failed experiment, the injector clattering to the floor. But Lila's response was chaotic, undirected. The lab became a whirlwind of spectral energy. Instruments flew from shelves, heavy equipment skidded across the floor, and the very air seemed to crackle with an unseen, malevolent force. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into a disorienting gloom, illuminated only by the emergency strobes, the eerie blue glow from the remaining active cryotubes, and the internal corpse-light luminescence of the reanimating horrors. I fumbled along the bank of drawers, my gloved fingers searching for any sign, any label, any clue. The whispers were deafening now, trying to tear my sanity apart. The chorus of 1,000 grieving children. Then my hand brushed against a small, tarnished brass plaque on one of the drawers. LV, Project Nightingale, Sub-Zero Stasis Unit, Alpha. This was it. The drawer was sealed shut with rust and age, but adrenaline lent me a desperate strength. I wrenched at the handle. With a screech of tortured metal, it gave way, sliding open perhaps 6 inches. No body lay within, only a thick layer of black, viscous frost, and nestled in its center, a small, child's silver locket, shaped like a star, identical to the one it seen in the old photograph of Lila Vexley in Evelyn's files. This was the locus, the anchor. The moment the locket was exposed to the slightly warmer air of the lab, the effect was instantaneous. A piercing, soul-tearing shriek, not from the whispers, but from the very walls, from the air itself, as if the entire sublevel were screaming. The spectral energy, once a chaotic storm, now focused, imploded, rushing towards the open drawer, towards the locket, with the force of a miniature black hole. The reanimating figure of Sarah Chen collapsed, its internal ice light extinguishing, its limbs falling slack. Even Vexley cried out, clutching her head as if struck by an invisible blow. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't about destroying Lila. It was about releasing her, or at least severing her torment from this cursed place, from her mother's insane machinations. I grabbed the heavy maglite from my belt. With a desperate cry, I slammed its reinforced end directly onto the ancient, exposed cooling coils and brittle wiring at the back of the open drawer unit. Sparks flew. A shower of acrid smoke. The archaic machinery within Unit Alpha sputtered, whined. Then, with a final violent surge, it erupted in a localized electrical fire, the flames licking at the viscous frost at the locket. The psychic scream intensified, then, abruptly, cut off. A profound, echoing silence descended, so complete it was almost painful. The unnatural cold in the lab receded, replaced by the acrid smell of burning insulation and ozone. The whispers were gone. Vexley stared, her face a mask of disbelief, then dawning, utter despair. Lila. Her voice was a raw, broken sound. She stumbled towards the burning, sparking drawer unit. But a section of the ceiling, weakened by the chaos, chose that moment to collapse. A shower of concrete and twisted rebar crashing down, blocking her path, and mercifully obscuring my view of it. Whatever remained within that drawer. The emergency strobe still pulsed. The distant wail the fire alarm Evelyn had triggered seemed to grow louder. There was a hammering at the main sub-level access door. Rescue, or at least, the less insane elements of St. Jude's, were on their way. Eleanor Vexley, a broken figure amidst the ruins of her life's monstrous work, simply sank to her knees, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. The doctor was no longer in. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, shouting voices, and the acrid stench of smoke and chemicals. Firefighters in heavy gear, followed by grim-faced hospital security, and a visibly shaken Evelyn Marsh, stormed the sub-level. Eleanor Vexley, unresponsive and catatonic, was taken into custody, her reign of refrigerated terror finally at an end. The full, horrifying extent of her clandestine operation was laid bare. The stolen bodies, the illegally acquired equipment, the meticulous, insane journals detailing decades of forbidden experimentation. Lara Chen, Evelyn's niece, was found in her cryotube, not reanimated as a monster, but tragically, definitively dead. One of Vexley's more recent, failed attempts at preservation. The other vessels were in similar states, their identities slowly being pieced together from Vexley's horrific ledger. St. Jude's Hospital became a media circus, a maelstrom of lawsuits, investigations, and hushed, horrified whispers that echoed far beyond its aging walls. My testimony, along with Tessa Lynn's recovered data and Coroner Barrett's reluctant corroboration of the morgue's long-standing anomalies, painted a picture so grotesque it was almost unbelievable. Yet the evidence was undeniable. I left Boston as soon as I was able. The city, the hospital, the very scent of antiseptic and lilies, had become unbearable. My skepticism, once a reliable shield, was now riddled with an understanding of shadows I could no longer ignore. The trauma I'd specialized in treating now felt like a shallow puddle compared to the abyss I'd stared into beneath St. Jude's. Liam's ghost was quieter now, though. Perhaps witnessing a different kind of horror, a different kind of loss, had put my own grief into a new, starker perspective. Or perhaps Lila, in her chaotic release, had inadvertently swept some of my own lingering sorrow away with her. Weeks later, Evelyn Marsh called. Her voice was weary, but there was a new steel in it. They're shutting down the entire pathology wing, Nathan. Decommissioning the old morgue. Sealing off Research Wing D permanently. Burying it, as they should have done 20 years ago. She paused. Sarah. The preliminary findings from Vexley's notes suggest she died quickly, before the alterations began. A small mercy, I suppose. There was a long silence. Louis Barrett retired, moved to a monastery in Vermont. Says he's going to spend the rest of his days praying for all the souls that passed through that place. Tessa Lynn apparently had taken a job with a cybersecurity firm on the West Coast, as far from old hospitals as possible. I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, consulting on less existentially fraught cases, but the chill of St. Jude's lingered, a phantom limb of dread. The 3 rules of the morgue would sometimes echo in my mind at odd hours, a grim reminder. One cool autumn evening, about 6 months after I'd left Boston, a small, unassuming manila envelope arrived at my new, deliberately anonymous P.O. box. No return address. Inside, there was no note, only a single, standard St. Jude's Hospital toe tag. My blood turned to ice. My hands trembled as I read the neatly printed black lettering. It wasn't my name this time. The tag read, Marsh, Evelyn, beneath it. Date of admission, today's date. And in the field for time of expiry, the space was, once again, chillingly, horrifyingly blank. The cycle hadn't broken. It had merely found a new patient. The whispers, I realized with a sudden, sickening certainty, might be gone from St. Jude's, but the cold was a far more patient collector.